Hello students, in previous part we have discussed about the first two parts of prosencephalon, that is forebrain. The first part was olfactory lobes and the second one was cerebrum. Now in this part we are going to discuss about the third part of the forebrain, that is diencephalon. Diencephalon, further it is divided into three different parts. First is epithalamus, second is thalamus and third is hypothalamus. Now in this diagram you see this C-shaped structure over here. This C-shaped structure, we have talked about it in previous part. This C-shaped structure, it helps or it connects the two cerebral hemispheres together. This C-shaped structure is called as corpus callosum. Below this corpus callosum there is a vascular structure. This red colored vascular structure, it is called as epithalamus. Epithalamus, it forms the roof of the diencephalon and it is formed from the pia mater, the third and the innermost layer of the meninges, that is pia mater. So this epithalamus, it is formed from the pia mater and it is a vascular structure. The anterior part of the epithalamus is called as anterior choroid plexus. This choroid plexus secretes the cerebrospinal fluid. So the anterior part of the epithalamus is called as anterior choroid plexus and it secretes cerebrospinal fluid. Whereas the posterior part, it turns into a swollen part or bulb-like structure. This structure is called as the mammillary body. So the anterior part of the epithalamus is called as anterior choroid plexus and the posterior swollen or bulging part is called as mammillary body. Below this epithalamus there is a mass of grey matter. That mass is called as thalamus. Thalamus is the mass of grey matter in the medullary region of the cerebrum. So here this is the medullary region of cerebrum. This is the cerebral cortex. Outer side that we talked about is the cerebral cortex. The inner side, that is cerebral medulla. So this thalamus is a mass or it is made up of grey matter and it is situated in the cerebral medulla. So this thalamus, below this thalamus there is a structure that is called as hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is the connection in between the nervous system and the endocrine system. This red colored structure you see here, this is the hypothalamus. It acts as the connection in between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Whereas this thalamus acts as a relay center. It collects the information from the nerves and it transfers the information to the cerebral region of the brain. So this thalamus acts as the relay center for the brain. Whereas hypothalamus, it acts as the connection between nervous system and the endocrine system. Also hypothalamus, it acts or it regulates the body temperature. That's why it is also called as thermostat of the body. Hypothalamus, it is the connection in between nervous system and endocrine system, and also it regulates the body temperature. That's why it is called as thermostat of the body. It also controls the involuntary things or involuntary activities like thirst, blood pressure, salivation, sweating, etc. So these involuntary activities are also controlled by the hypothalamus. And it also secretes the neurohormones. So this hypothalamus, it further turns into a stalk-like structure. That stalk-like structure is called as infundibulum or it is also called as pars nervosa. This infundibulum is nervous in origin. It is made up of neurons. Whereas the epithalamus that we talked about, it is not originated from the neurons. It is not made up of neurons. It is made up of pia matter. Whereas this stalk-like structure below the hypothalamus, it is called as infundibulum or pars nervosa and it is made up of neurons. Below this, below the infundibulum, there is a swollen structure. That swollen structure is called as hypophysis. or it is also called as pharyngeal outgrowth. It is nothing but a pharyngeal outgrowth. This hypophysis, the bulging structure below this infundibulum, it is called as hypophysis and it is a pharyngeal outgrowth. This infundibulum and this hypophysis together they make the pituitary gland. So that's why it is said to be the connection in between the endocrine system as well as the nervous system. This infundibulum and this hypophysis, both of them together make the pituitary gland. That's why this hypothalamus is said to be the connection in between endocrine system and nervous system. Now below this is the pons and medulla region, and here this part you see here, that is the midbrain. This is cerebellum, and as we talked about, the C-shaped structure you see here, that is the corpus callosum. Below the corpus callosum there is a vascular structure that is called as epithalamus. Epithalamus, the anterior side of it is called as anterior choroid plexus, and this choroid plexus secretes cerebrospinal fluid, whereas the posterior part of the epithalamus is a little bit swollen. That part is called as mammillary body. Below the epithalamus there is a mass of grey matter, a mass which is made up of grey matter, and that is called as thalamus. Thalamus acts as a relay center. It collects all the information brought by the nerves and it transfers the information to the cerebral region of the brain. So this thalamus, it acts as a relay center. Below the thalamus there is a structure, muscular structure, that is called as hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is actually a connection in between the nervous system and endocrine system. Below the hypothalamus there is a stalk-like structure. That stalk-like structure is called as infundibulum, or it is also called as pars nervosa. This infundibulum or pars nervosa, it is nervous in origin, means it is made up of neurons. Now below this infundibulum there is a swollen part, swollen structure. That structure is called as hypophysis. It is actually a pharyngeal outgrowth. And this infundibulum and this hypophysis together they make the pituitary gland. That's why this hypothalamus is said to be the connection in between the endocrine system and the nervous system. Below the pituitary gland there is pons, and below the pons there is medulla region, and behind it, it is the midbrain. And also the third ventricle, it opens in the diencephalon and it is called as diocele. The third ventricle which we talked about, there are two ventricles in the cerebrum. As we talked about in the previous part, these are the cerebral hemispheres. This is the cerebral fissure which divides the hemispheres into two parts, which divides the cerebrum into two hemispheres. So this is the right hemisphere, this is the left hemisphere, and there is a cavity inside it. There is a cavity in between it. These cavities are called as ventricles. These cavities are called as ventricles. The one which is there in the right hemisphere is called as the first ventricle. And the one which is there in the left side is called as the second ventricle. And these two ventricles, they join here in the diencephalon, or they connect in the diencephalon, and they form the third ventricle. So this third ventricle is actually situated in the diencephalon and it is called as diocele, whereas these two ventricles, the first and the second ventricle, they are called as paracele, and the third ventricle is called as the diocele. So here, this is the structure of the diencephalon, or the third part of the prosencephalon. The epithalamus, it is a vascular structure and it is made up of pia matter. Thalamus, it is a mass of grey matter and it is found in the medullary region of the cerebrum. and it acts as a relay center. And the third part that we saw, that is hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a connection in between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The stalk-like structure below the hypothalamus is called as infundibulum, and again it further turns into a swollen structure. That swollen structure is called as hypophysis. Infundibulum and hypophysis together, they make the pituitary gland. That's why this hypothalamus is called as the connection in between nervous system and the endocrine system.